Update on my 1UZ 4Runner project. Again, this is a 94 SC400 engine using the matching transmission from that donor car and a T100 transfer case in my old 87 Toyota 4Runner. Talking about fitment. Been some discussion on I think one of the Facebook groups about fitting these, and specifically the oil pan, but I thought I'd actually show a few things here that I wasn't able to picture very well until I tried it. The first thing I want to show, let's get my light up here, is firewall clearance. I have this thing tight back up against the firewall. The narrow spots are, or the tight spots are going to be the cam caps right there. So I actually dented this, I pounded that back a little. My initial test fit had that was hitting, so I pounded that back a little bit. Went quite a bit more than I needed to, but I didn't want to have to do it again because of that, and this truck does not have air conditioning, so I got lots of room behind there. Yeah, you got a coolant bridge, heater hoses, actually a pretty good space there. Call it the kickdown cable, the line pressure cable there for the transmission. Let's wiggle it here. That right there. That little clip is pretty tight, but you could work with that if you needed to. And then down here, again, cam cap. This is actually probably the tightest spot in the truck. Is that cam cap to the firewall. Those holes in the firewall there are where the parking brake cable and mechanism would have protruded through there. Get that crap out of there. Get that out of the way. then it fits pretty well. Yeah, so that's how it fits. Don't mind the cap on there. I've got some vacuum lines capped off so I could run it on the stand. It's not, obviously the install's not done yet. So side to side fits pretty well. Yeah, I opted to cut the upper radiator support. That made it possible for me to install engine, transmission, transfer case all as an assembly. I took the Chevy 4.3 setup out that I had in there and as an assembly, and I put this one in and out and in, all assembled. That was pretty sweet. I bought an aftermarket upper radiator support that I'm going to cut long so they overlap, and I'll put some riv nuts so that I can bolt that back on, is my plan. Made it way easier, in my opinion, to work with. I'll put the radiator in here in a little bit and show you how that fits. But first, the other fitment thing that I found that I wasn't looking for, was there's a plastic cover that went around these wires, which go up to my igniters. There was a cover that supported and protected those. That did not fit between the valve cover and the steering shaft here. I had to cut that back. Not a big deal, but had to be done. Stock SC400 exhaust manifolds. I cut the flanges off and I've welded a pipe on to extend that down. I'll get underneath and show you that in a minute. But the manifold itself clears with enough space at the steering shaft. I am going to use the heat shields on there as well. That one will have to be cut to get into place around that, but it'll go. I'm going to try to keep as much heat out of the engine bay in this setup as I possibly could. I should note, the last engine I had in here was a Chevy 4.3 V6, 90-degree V6. And I had advanced adapters, block hugger headers on it, and I had to put a noticeable dent in one of the primaries to clear that steering shaft. So this setup is narrower than that one. And width-wise, that should hold true with many of the older small block Chevys. Height-wise, I sort of chose this height. I could have gone higher. I was able to lift this up higher on the hoist, my engine hoist, while I was test fitting things, but I didn't like it. We got into this plug and stuff hitting my heater valve and putting pressure on. This is my throttle cable. This area started getting kind of angry as it went higher. This stuff could all be relocated. So the engine could be pulled up higher, probably an inch or two in the front. I don't think two. Probably an inch in the front, which is worth noting. I'll show you when we. Well, actually, we can get down into under the bottom and show you. The next thing was the oil pan. Now this engine did come out of an SC400, and as such had a mid/rear sump oil pan on it. I forgot my light. I did test fit it with that, and I did not like it. That puts the sump of the pan back here, which is right above the front diff. Now I do have a 2-inch body lift. I also have a plate transfer case cross member that lifts the drivetrain up 2 inches back there. So, and of course my motor mounts I fabricated those. So I have some room there, but not a lot. A bracket lift or something would make this not an issue. You know, the 4-inch bracket lift, you easily could have used a mid-rear sump setup. But I didn't like that. I switched it out. I had an LS400 front sump setup that I picked up, and I swapped it out. I much prefer the way this sits. I've removed the steering dampener, and without that I've got a lot of clearance. This is like 1 3/4 inches between the pan and the steering rod. So if I mounted the engine a little bit higher, I could have done this setup without the body lift. I plan to put the steering dampener back on, but I'm going to mount it below this bracket where it normally went in here. I'm going to mount it down here somewhere, space it down, make a little bracket to support it, double shear, and it looks like that should work pretty well. Or a person could get one that clamps onto or weld a new bracket. There's lots of ways you could do that to make some more clearance in that area if you wanted to. So this could be done without the body lift with this oil pan. That diff sticks up above the steering shaft. If this was mid sump, I don't believe you could do this 4-wheel drive without a body lift. It'd just be too tight. Yeah. Let's get around behind the front diff and I'll show you what it looks like. Okay, view from behind. You can see I have a mile of clearance between the front diff and the oil pan now, which should give me, which is going to be really nice for running exhaust and stuff like that, because I'm going to have obviously front diff or front drive shaft there. Exhaust is going to have to come across underneath at some point. Still have to work that out. Might come down at a steeper angle and cross it over the front diff because I have so much room up there. Otherwise I'll do it right behind the bell housing. The stock manifold with the body lift might have fit, but I could not get it up into place with the stock flange on there. So I've got a little chunk of pipe welded on there, just tacked on there for now. I like at least how it sits on this side. Again, I might change the other side, but there you go. I'm gonna put I'll put a flange on either side, come across to a collector and a flange over here, and yeah, I'll get to that when I do it. Height-wise, again, how well you can see any of this. Pretty tight up against the body. I think you could go an inch higher at the front, which wouldn't be very much here, but not much more than that. This is the Lexus rear-wheel drive transmission, but I've put the shift shaft from four-wheel drive in it so that the linkage is on this side, and this is the stock linkage from a 98 4Runner. So consider that, but all the way forward in the this is the 1 and 2 position on the shifter. It does touch the body there ever so slightly, so I'm gonna have to do a little something, but not much. And then, of course, my bud built cross member. I had to move it back about 3 inches. So I drilled 2 holes in the middle to catch the factory threaded holes that match these. I think I'm going to drill and tap holes here into the frame. Put 2 more bolts here. I could easily weld a bracket on the outside here to catch a nut there. But on the other side, the equivalent here is on the inside of the frame and not really accessible. So I did have to grind, take some material off of said cross member because the transfer case is right there, and it sticks down a bit, and so the skid plate that is supposed to bolt on here won't fit without modifications, but I'll worry about that later. And the front diff, or the front drive shaft, the flange is different. So I've got the front drive shaft that came with this truck, with the 87 4Runner, and that's got a different bolt pattern. So I got this pentadapter, it's called. It says it's supposed to have 5 different patterns drilled into it, though I count 24 holes. You do the math, whatever. But nice heavy-duty steel thing with threaded holes. Bolt that to between the transfer case and the drive shaft, and that should be good to go. All right, and lastly, we'll show with the radiator in place. This is a CSF 3-row radiator for the 22RE 87 4Runner. Bolts right to the mounts on the body. So that's kind of neat. It's quite a bit thick. It's a pretty thick radiator, and even still, with an aftermarket part store slim radiator fan, I have just enough room. I do think that if I secured this wire back, there would be room to route the serpentine belt. I'll show you better here, because the belt comes up there and goes across, and then it would come up. I don't really have a line of sight, but it would go back down that direction. So I do think I would have room for this if I wanted to run it. May or may not. And they're just simple straight aluminum flat bar bolted to the factory tabs where the factory shroud went, and literally just zip tied. There's holes drilled in it, and the fan is literally just zip tied to that. There are, of course, these things come with kits that pull through the radiator fins, which would tighten it up against the radiator some. I'd probably gain a half an inch there, but I don't like using those, so I'm going to try to avoid it. I also had one incident with the 4.3. I ran the same radiator and fan setup with the Chevy 4.3, and I did have one time where we were on a trail, a real tight, windy trail with a lot of trees, where the only airflow was from the fan, and I heat soaked. It started getting hot, and everything was hot. I mean, the fenders were hot to the touch. It just heat soaked the whole area. There just wasn't any air moving. So I kind of need a more CFM fan. Although I did the coating on the manifolds, I did some tests on that. If you want to see, and like I said, I'm gonna be running the factory shields over those manifolds as well. So hopefully that'll help keep some of the heat out of the engine bay and just push it downstream a little bit. I also have, where'd it go? Here it is. This nifty single pass transmission / power steering cooler. It's literally just an empty, well, that doesn't show up at all. There's nothing fancy to it. These fins protrude into the inside and just help get rid of a little more heat. I'll be using that in the return for my power steering. Trying to decide, I might either mount it up here, make some sort of bracket that it can mount to up here, or possibly down here, sort of on the frame, I don't know, there-ish or something. But yeah, just to help dissipate a little of the heat coming out of the power steering system. So yeah, I'm excited about it. It fits real well, and I got a good size, quite a bit of capacity and radiator there. I don't have any reason to suspect that can't cool this package. This one was modified. You can see it was modified for a turbo engine. So I have one of those cheesy little caps. No, those Dorman bypass caps. They say that they're safe for coolant, but they don't hold up to the heat and pressure in a radiator system. That's my second or third one on there. So I need to figure something else out there. But again, low on the priority list. But it's coming along, despite the fact that I can only work on it a few hours a week, thanks to the children who are